Hello and welcome to Business Finishing School. Let your business brain finish what your entrepreneurial heart started. Our catalyzing statement is a successful entrepreneur inside of every business. Enjoy this module. Welcome to this month's module, The War Room. And this is something that I have a lot of personal experience with because Rick has performed war rooms for my business and actually has invited me to war rooms in other people's businesses to come in and act as a participant and consultant to help out. This module by itself will give you a return on investment for this program times 10 or 20 if you execute it properly. It's a very powerful tactic for your business and something that once you learn it, you should act upon immediately. So I'm really excited to talk about this one, only because of my deep personal experience with it. And I got to tell you, in working with Rick and observing Rick, this is one of the areas where I thought it was like a wow experience for me. When he came in the first time to my business and did that first war room, I was drained at the end of the day because you got to really put a lot of energy in, but also I was completely blown away by what had just happened after being in business for over 2 decades and having never done it before and recognizing, my God, what if I had learned this strategy years ago? So I want you to learn it now. I want you to apply it as quickly as possible. And I hope you're picking up on my enthusiasm for it, and that's contagious for you because it will make a big difference in your business and career.
So why do we call it a war room? I actually don't love that word, war, but the fact is business at times can be a war. But that's not why we name it the war room. We name it the war room because if you were to go into a war, what's the very first thing you'd like to do? Well, if you're smart, the first thing you want to do is have a complete inventory of every single solitary asset, every asset. And that includes all of your resources. A resource is an asset. Everything that you know and can apply and your unique abilities, and the unique abilities of all of your employees and executives and partners and vendors. They're all resources. And another word for that is they're assets. So the reason we call it a war room is because we want to have a complete inventory of all of your assets and resources and whatever word you want to add in there. So you have to think about what are all the things that are advantageous to my business. And when you put it in those terms, that's also part of your assets. So that's why we call it a war room. I've had people push back on me and say, I don't know if I like the word war room. But then when you go through it, as Pat said, it's in a sense a cleansing. You're going to get everything out of your mind and out of the minds of the key stakeholders, and you're going to put it on documents and on paper and on computer. So you're not carrying it around anymore. And I think for you, Patrick, that's why it was so tiring. Because one of the things that I do, and before I say what I'm about to say, I want to say this. We're going to end the module with an application to tell you exactly how to do this. So as always, the first portion of the video will be about describing the concept of the war room. But we're going to give you some to-dos now. I would encourage you to just listen and not take notes. Because at the end we'll have the application. So one of the things that I do at the beginning, and Patrick, I think you may have been a little nervous, I said to his executive team, who had never met me before, I said, listen, you have to be completely honest. Everything that you say in this room is confidential. Nobody else in the company is going to know about it. But if you're not honest, it's not going to work. Now, you're going to say things that may hurt Pat's feelings. But I think that was an understatement because they were unbelievably honest.
That's why, and that's the other context. You know, he's maybe soft playing the term war room basically because it has parallels to setting up for a war, you know, and looking at assets. But it's really going to war. And there's basically 2 whys behind it. Why are you going to do this? You're either going to do it proactively or you're going to do it reactively. And I can tell you, if you're in business for any length of time, every business at a point in time has a crisis, it has a moment of truth, it has challenges, and a lot of times we get kind of stuck or paralyzed or put into a rut as we're trying to deal with that and we get into survival mode. I've been there multiple times over my career. So that's when it's time to trigger a war room, saying we need to go to war right now. Our business is under a significant challenge. or it's in a rut, it's stuck, and we need to stop. We need to pull together. We got to go into the war room, and we're going to come out, and we're going to have a battle plan when we leave that room. And then secondly, I believe that even if you're not stuck in a rut or you're not in crisis, one of the best ways to prevent ever getting there is proactively calling for war rooms. If you remember from the basic principles that we taught in prior modules, one of the basic principles, the foundational principles of business, was the rhythms and rituals to enhance performance and success in a business. I think the rhythm of having regular war rooms, minimally at least one a year, and maybe even a couple, is absolutely mandatory for every business, and I think that will keep you out of ruts. The other thing is whenever it's time to grow or change, if you know that right now you're saying, our business now is going to change, we're going to transcend, we want to grow, that's the time to call a war room to say, okay, it's time for us to reorganize, take inventory, get on the same page, and then come out again with a battle plan to make these changes, to create that growth. That's another time as to when to call for a war room.
And as always with these modules, Patrick and I have framed this video. And how we framed it is why. Why do you need a war room, which we're going to cover a little bit more, and Patrick's touched on it. Who do you need there? When are you going to have it? Where are you going to have it? Who, what, when, where, how, basically. We're going to cover all of that, so you're crystal clear. The biggest thing is the why, which Patrick just touched on. Every business, I haven't seen one that hasn't been in some type of rut. Maybe you feel overwhelmed. Maybe there's a lot of pressure coming at you. Maybe it's just that once a year time where you're going to have your executive team or key stakeholders go in an off-site. I think at least one time a year you should do a war room. There's an old proverb that I once heard, and it goes like this: when is the best time to plant a tree? Answer: 20 years ago. The second best time is today. So there's not a business in the world that cannot benefit from having a war room. So as a result of watching this module, me and Patrick would like you to plan a war room, and let's talk about what it looks like. And the applications will go a little bit deeper. What it looks like ideally, and by the way, you may not always have the opportunity to do it in an ideal way, but ideally it's an off-site meeting room with no cell phones, with no distractions, and with about 5 people that are key stakeholders in the business. What's a key stakeholder? You, of course, your key executives, your key vendors potentially if they're an important part of your business, or key partners, or maybe an investor, or maybe a board member. But that's up to you, about 5 people.
So we're going to get into the what now, and that's going to get into the details of running the war room. But let me just get itemized again on the setup, because I think the setup is enormously important, and I actually want to interview Rick a little bit and ask him a couple of questions about this on things I think will be important. So let's start out with why. Again, proactively, because you want to keep your business moving forward and prevent it from getting into a rut or crisis. Reactively, as soon as there's a crisis or you recognize that you're stuck in a rut, it's time to call a war room. So that's the why. Where? If you can't get it off-site, if there's a reasonable place to do it on-site, that's okay. But Rick really recommends take your people off-site to a new environment. It will ignite more creativity and more free thinking as compared to their normal environment that they might be working in every single day. So highly recommended you do it off-site in a creative environment if you can. Like, don't go down to a basement or something, but go to a place where there's a lot of natural light and a little bit inspiring. Also, when should it be done? Now, another part that I want to dig into a little bit on the setup side is how many hours should this war room be, Rick? I mean, probably 4 hours isn't enough. And you don't want to keep them hostage for like 10 hours. So what should the structure, how many hours should you set up for when you do this?
For me, having done this many, many times, and by the way, it's worth saying now, when we look at a business and we first get involved in a business, all businesses are in some form of crisis. It's just a matter of how much. We like to do a war room because you get a lot of data from it. So if you're getting involved in a new project or a new business for the first time, do it then. If you've had your business for a long time, get it on the calendar for some time in the future. But to answer your question, you want to have breakfast, if it's off-site, together as a team, and maybe ask some questions. What are some positive things going on in your life? Tell me some good news about the business, about your personal life, and just have a very casual conversation over breakfast. And then you want to start at 9 o'clock sharp. No cell phones, no computers but one, and we'll tell you about why there's one computer. And you want to have lunch brought in, because you don't want to have to go to a restaurant and worry about a waiter, waitress, server interrupting. So you want to make sure that it's in a location where you're managing the environment. So 9 to 12, break for lunch, start up again, and you want to end at 4.
And a working lunch you'd recommend also.
Yes, working lunch.
So that means have lunch brought in, and conversation can continue while people are eating during the working lunch. That's the way we did it.
Yep.
So to recap, everybody meets at 8 for breakfast. 9 o'clock sharp, the event begins. Working lunch somewhere around 12, 12:30, and then be done by about 4 o'clock. So that will help give you the parameters for the time so you know what to fit in where, and we'll get detail on that in a few moments. Now, who you invite is another big question. And sometimes it could be maybe outside consultants. You obviously need your key staff or executives there. So depending on the type of business, obviously if you're a practice, you'd have, if you have an office manager, other key staff. It might be, though, that you have affiliates in that kind of a practice who are contractors that maybe need to be a part or maybe don't. You'd have to decide who the key people are. And of course, if you're working with consultants, you want to invite those consultants in. In my situation, where it's more of a a corporate type business environment where I have CFOs and CEOs and those types of people, we invite the key executive team. But the one thing that you said, Rick, is to keep this down to maybe a maximum of 6. I think you like 5 plus maybe the business owner. So 6 total as a maximum. Otherwise, it can get out of hand. And that's exactly the number, if I'm thinking correctly. Yeah, if I remember correctly, that's exactly the number of people that we had in my war room.
Mm-hmm. Just to clarify something that I said earlier, I said 5 people, but then I was the 6th man, and I quarterbacked the session, which I love to do. You can, and hopefully you will, learn how to do this yourself, so you don't have to call me to parachute in and help you.
Now here's a real important thing. How do you do the invite? In other words, imagine a business that's under stress or being challenged, and you've got people who you want to bring in for a serious event, calling it a war room. Do you write them a letter calling for the war room? Do you sit face-to-face with them to say, here's what we need to do and why? You don't want to articulate this in a way that gets people fearful. You want to kind of ignite inspiration, but let them know, especially if it's a crisis war room, they already know that there's problems. And you have to show leadership in your approach toward pulling this thing together and saying, we are going to pull together and do something that's going to be a breakthrough for our company. But do you have any advice on kind of how to communicate this? Because I know you guided me through this process very well, saying sit with so-and-so and say this, send out this note to all of them. Why don't you talk about that for a moment?
Well, one thing that's important is if you have a third party do it for you. And in Patrick's case, this is how it happened. They didn't know me. They had never met me before. So Patrick said, listen, I have a friend/consultant coming in. It was 2 years ago. By the time you're watching this video, it would be more than 2 years ago that we did it. But I have a consultant coming in to help us assess all of our assets and our resources and pick a plan for the future. So it was very interesting how when everybody gathered into the room, they were like, what is this guy? The energy was very strange. But as you'll see, once you start and people realize, wow, we're actually going to get some value out of this, and the company's going to benefit, and I'll ultimately benefit as a stakeholder, everybody gets in line really fast. So your question was?
So the question is, written invitation, like an email? Mm-hmm. Go, invite the people face-to-face each? Mm-hmm. Do you have a recommendation? Both work?
Yeah. I think we're overthinking that part. The bottom line is once you identify the stakeholders that you want there, a email followed by a phone call. There's only going to be about 5. So send the email. We have a sample in the implementation guide of what the email should say. But basically, it says, I trust you. You're a valued part of the business. I need you and want you to come to a war room exercise that we're conducting. It'll take about 8 hours out of your life from 8 to 4 on Wednesday afternoon, of this date. You email them, and then you follow it up with a phone call, and you say, basically, I just sent you an email. I'm inviting you to a war room exercise. If you want to learn more about it, there's an implementation guide that I could send you so you could learn more about it. But I think that might be overkill. The fact that you told them that you're a trusted part of the business, I think that will get their attention right there.
The next question is, do this during normal business hours, take a day out of the week, or do it over a weekend on a weekend day?
That's a hard question for me to answer because I don't know your particular situation. I prefer doing it during the week because people are more business-minded then, but a lot of people, up to you, prefer doing it on a weekend. Another thing that could be good is if you already have scheduled on a rhythmic basis an off-site with your team. Maybe you have a convention, maybe you do trade shows, maybe you're going somewhere to an event. Add a day before or after that event so people don't have to make extra reservations at hotels or anything. That's a good way to do it. Almost every hotel on the planet has a boardroom of some kind, and they're not that expensive. All you really need is chairs around the table inside of a hotel. So that's really up to you. My preference is during the week because they're more business-minded.
Right. And sometimes, and that's the way we did it. I know sometimes with like practices, people say I don't want to give up patient hours, or businesses in crisis, they don't want to give up employee productivity. But bottom line is, I think if you can pause for the day during the week, that's the best time. But if you got to do it on a Saturday, it's better than nothing. Now, let's get into the what. What are the actual steps and processes during the day, starting out from the beginning, going all the way to the end, on how to conduct this thing? And you start out, when you came to mind, you start out with what we referred to, or what you referred to as a SWOT analysis. So explain that, please.
Well, SWOT analysis, which is spelled S.W.O.T, stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So the setup of the room is you want to have only one computer open, preferably a laptop at the head of the table. You absolutely have to have a projector, a quiet one, projecting the image of the laptop on the screen for all of us to see. So in Pat's setup, and we even have a picture of the setup, because setup's important, and Pat knows that the outcome is often related to the setup of the room.
Yeah, and I'll interrupt for a second, because that was, you got there early when we did our war room, and literally it took an hour to reconfigure the room, saying it's got to be set up this way. And Rick is kind of a freak about these things in a good way, because the setup and the environment means a lot. I remember even just when we were interviewing executives, sometimes you'd say, you'd have a certain way for a room to be set up to be able to do that interview. In this case, I kind of had it set up classroom style. What you made was more of a U, so that basically it was contiguous, how we're all kind of together, but everybody could face the screen with the projector. So whoever's quarterbacking the event that day will be sitting by a computer keyboard with a projector there that's going up on a screen, so everybody can see the screen, but only one person's doing the inputting.
And there is a method to my madness. In his case, I wanted to be invisible. They were all facing forward, and I was at the head of the table behind them in a sense. So the dialogue got and became a lot more fluid and a lot more honest, because they weren't looking directly at me. If it was classroom style, it would have been worse. I think too often people don't think about their environment, their office, their home. I think about my environment all the time. I want it set up to accomplish the things I want to accomplish. And it was very interesting when his executives walked into the room. I remember one of them who's got kind of an interesting personality, and he knows what he wants. He was off to the side. I said, no, you're part of the team, right? You're here for the war room, right? You want to get value, right? Sit there. And I didn't do it in a way that was aggressive. I did it in a way where he realized, well, if I'm here, I guess I might as well get the most value I can, and he's right. I should sit right here. It was very odd, but you have to take control of the environment. So you have the setup. You can look in the implementation guide to see exactly if you're not visual, but you want a quiet projector. You want a quiet computer that's not banging keyboards. And you want to make sure there's no ambient noise. Patrick, you taught me that word. you just want to make sure that it's an environment where the most important thing are the people in the room and the fact that you can hear each other. So environment and setup, very important. So I think we covered that.
And let's just establish that in the case, if it's your business, your practice, your whatever, you should be the person leading the war room. Unless you have a strong person who's responsible for the operation and you feel like you're more of the person that should be there but not lead it for whatever your personality style is. In my case, Rick led because Rick was the very experienced consultant and we were doing this for the first time, and I was hiring a consultant to come in and do this, and you could do the same thing. Rick was very expensive, so I don't know if you want to try to hire him, but he's worth every penny and more. But ultimately, I think for the majority of entrepreneurs, majority of practices that are out there, majority of whatever your business is in the way that you approach it, the business leader is the person who should lead this. And I believe right now I can lead a war room now. I learned it from Rick, but because you're learning it from the module, I feel very comfortable that once you watch these videos, read the implementation guide, I feel very confident that you'll be able to do this.
Patrick, let me just add one more thing. If you're horrible on a keyboard, ideally you want the leader to be the one who's typing, but if you're that person who's horrible, do not be the typer and leader. Pick somebody who's really good on a keyboard and really good on Excel and Word, because you're going to be setting up tabs very quickly. As the quarterback, and as I've said, I've done this a lot, I'm constantly, as people come up with new ideas for asset classes as an example, and assets could be intellectual property, they could be ex-employees, they could be mailing lists, both electronic and otherwise, they could be land that you own somewhere in another part of the United States. But the average business that I have seen in my career has about 400 assets. And you're probably saying, we don't have 400 assets. You absolutely do have a large number of assets, larger than you think. So while people are talking, and I'm keeping track of all this, I'm adding tabs on the worksheets, I'm adding Word documents, I'm capturing it all. And what that's doing is the people that are watching are seeing words on the screen and they're seeing categories being created. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I want to reinforce the point that you have to be really good on the computer if you're going to lead. And if you're not good, get a really good typist on there.
So now let's talk about, I think, the opening statement, which really positions the whole thing. And that, I believe, sets the tone and gets it off on the right foot, which you did brilliantly at my war room. What should the opening statement be? How do you want to set the tone for this?
Okay. Before I say that, though, why don't you tell me how you felt as an observer while I was opening, and I had never met any of these people before, because how you felt will give them the sense, and then I'll say what I said.
Basically, the feeling or the experience was, number one, you took control of the circumstance as far as saying there's no doubt that you were going to be driving and running the process. Number two, you gave them the why. In other words, you basically spoke to the reason we're here today is, and identified the challenges that we wanted to overcome as a result of being in the war room. You then set the tone on the being honest, meaning, listen, it doesn't work if people can't express themselves fully and honestly. Nobody is going to have anything held against them for honestly expressing their sentiments about certain things in the business. And that, I think, gave everybody the comfort and empowered them to say that their opinion mattered, and we wanted to know what was inside of their head. And I think, totally, it was just, why are we there? What are the rules of engagement? And let's get excited about moving through this, because on the other side of it's going to be the overcoming of challenges and the ignition of new things that are going to take our business to a great place.
Yeah, and so I appreciate you setting that up, Patrick. So very specifically what I said, and this may change depending on the circumstances, welcome. It's now 9 a.m. We're going to be here till about 4 p.m. So I want to orient you to the fact that for the next 7 hours, as we explained in the communication to you, we're not going to have any access. No cell phones, no emails, nothing like that. I also want to ask you all if you can be honest. And here's a key thing. Are there any sacred cows in this business that cannot be discussed openly and honestly.
Yeah, I remember that coming up. That's where it started getting pretty interesting, and that it was I believe a turning point in the whole process right from the get-go, and because Rick is very upfront like that, and I think you need to be too. Are there any sacred cows? In other words, we're here, and we want to tear everything down and rebuild it. Is there anything that's a sacred cow that we can't touch, or can we go after anything in the business? And I would have started in the beginning and said, oh no, there's no sacred cows here. But then as things started being hauled in and saying, I think that this shouldn't be anymore, I think that this employee is an issue, or I think whatever it might be, and suddenly, as the business owner, I'm sitting back saying, well, no, maybe it is a sacred cow. I don't know that we'd want to stop doing that, or I don't know that we'd want to kill that, or whatever. And when that happens, suddenly it gets to be pretty interesting. And so the sacred cow comment is good, because if people start throwing them out, saying there have been some sacred cows in this business, but I think that we need to look at them and say that maybe we need to kill those sacred cows. So that was a great part of the context setting before the actual war room started.
Yeah, and this is really, really important, because here's what always happens. And when I say always, it's happened every time I've done this. Are there any sacred cows? And of course, the owner or the CEO says, no, 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 there's no sacred cows. But then I start asking, are there any poor performers that you cannot fire because you're related to them, as an example? I remember distinctly one war room that I did where the CEO was a woman, and when we asked about sacred cows, she said there are no sacred cows. And one of the stakeholders who was in the room said, well, what about your sister who works at the company? She's underperforming. She causes chaos in the office. She's been caught stealing from the company, but yet we can't fire her. And something that's been around, in that case, it was around for 15 years. But because of a war room, in the first 10 minutes of the meeting, this woman's CEO, who would never confront the fact that all of her stakeholders wanted her sister out of the business, for the first time she said, you know what? There are no sacred cows. So I pulled up a tab, and it said sacred cows, and we listed sister in the business. And by the end of that meeting, and I can't remember how soon after, but by the end of that meeting, she had made the decision that her sister needed to be fired. And that was the clog or cog in the wheel, or clog in the drain, that was stopping the flow of that business. So right off the bat, you can get assets from the war room. An asset being, we're going to fire my sister, and the business is going to explode. In Patrick's case, there was a few sacred cows that at the beginning he didn't own up to, but then the staff or the stakeholders who were there brought it up. And right off the bat, what does that do? That makes the people in the meeting realize this is going to be different. And I could feel the energy shift right then. So you start off at the beginning with sacred cows. Once we get the sacred cows on the table, then, and by the way, you want to keep an inventory of this, and you could see this on the implementation guide accompanying document. It'll be the downloadable forms that go along with the implementation guide, so you could see how this Excel spreadsheet lays out. So in this case, you want to pull up a tab. At the top of it, it says sacred cows, and get them all there. Now, as we said, everybody's staring at the same screen, so they're going to see sacred cows. And guess what? More are going to come out. And there's no judgment of anything. You're just gathering a data. So now we get the sacred cows out, and then we immediately jump into what are all the categories of assets that the business owns. And the categories of assets, again, you got the tab on the bottom of the Excel spreadsheet. The quarterback clicks the tab, up it comes, and there's some that are priming it on your list. If you go look at it, what are the categories of assets? The categories of assets are people. People come in forms of employees, ex-employees, partners, ex-partners, clients, shareholders, vendors. So I just listed some people, but I'd rather structure this conversation better. And Patrick and I prepared a list of assets to get your brain pumping. Also, on the implementation guide supplement, you'll see some other assets. But why don't we work through it in a more formal fashion, Pat?
Okay, so we'll do it this way. We'll go through category by category. Each one will be a tab, okay? So you'll write the tab, and then as people are throwing it out, the person who's typing is capturing all this in the spreadsheet in each tab. So we start generically with this concept of people as assets, but there's subcategories of people, and each can be their own and probably should be their own tab. Let's start out with employees, but not only employees, ex-employees also you threw out there. So talk about employees, ex-employees for a moment.
Yeah, sometimes people may have left your company years ago, but they valued what you valued. They may have left because their spouse moved and they got pulled away, or you never know. You'd be surprised that there are ex-people that used to be involved in your business that are an asset. So we're not judging right now. Just get them out there, put them on the list.
And that's important, the idea of saying that, we're not judging, don't judge, oh, why should we talk about, it's like literally anything that pops into people's heads, boom, it's like, it pops on the sheet, pops on the sheet. Another tab could be vendors and ex-vendors. Your B2B, your business-to-business relationships. Who do you buy stuff from? Who do you sell stuff to? Basically that interaction. There are many times those are assets. Partners or ex-partners that are in the business are people assets. So start to look at the varying people that are involved. I'll tell you another one that people probably don't think about, and this is really critical, are ambassadors for the business. Who are your big raving fans that are your customers, your patients, what have you, but people who have, without much prompting, promoted your business or are excited about your business. If you have a practice and you've got patients that are in that practice and you've got these patients that are raving fans that are telling their friends and family about you and referring, those are people that you also go on the list because they are big assets for a business.
So here's the bottom line, and if we're over explaining this, it's because it's critical. Every business has a lot of assets, and everything's considered an asset. You probably never thought about it, but the unique abilities of each stakeholder in the business is an asset. If I'm a really good public speaker on stage and I have the ability to sell a product on stage and I'm not using that asset, it's still an asset. So make sure that some of the tabs are the key stakeholders in the business and what are their unique abilities. So you have to be creative, and the team has to be creative when you're coming up with the categories of assets. So with each category of asset, we've started with people. Pat hammered it home a little bit more. Think of all the people in that category. So as an example, all of the ex-employees, get them up there. The ex-employees that have some value to the business. If you were involved in a lawsuit with an ex-employee, you wouldn't want to put them up there. Intellectual property. What is all the intellectual property that you could think of? And it's just what you could think of at the session. You don't want to have a lawyer come in and say, well, here's the list of... The opportunity for a war room is to get people talking and communicating, not consulting with databases.
And intellectual property, incidentally, might be traditional IP, like Rick is talking about, patents, trademarks, copyrights, that kind of stuff. But you also might have videos that you used to use for your marketing, or audios of presentations or lectures or whatever it might be. But these things are also assets that are, in a sense, intellectual property, because you have copyright or whatever title that you hold to those particular assets, and they can be leveraged into new initiatives. So you want to capture all that stuff. And it can go in one or two categories. The other category that would relate to that, if it's not IP, is what's on the shelf. And I love what's on the shelf, because before my war room, if you came to me and said, you got a lot of assets sitting around that are very valuable to your audience that you're not leveraging at all, I would have said, oh no, we optimize, we use everything, we leverage. But literally, as a result of the stuff that went up on the sheet, when we started asking the question, assets on the shelf that are basically collecting dust type assets, it led to initiatives that were very easy because the assets were there. We just had to basically package and then write up some copy and promote. And it turned into literally within 12 months, hundreds of thousands of dollars of very high margin revenue, because we bothered to sit down, list it, get excited about it, and then act upon it. So list of assets is very important because that generates revenue. Now another tab that's on the other side, because that's the side, like I get excited about stuff we can do to generate revenue. Here's where Rick gets real excited. How can we cost cut? Where can we cost cut? And boy, did he drive this. And I know about several of Rick's war rooms, either having participated myself outside of my company in war rooms, or him telling me the story about war rooms he went to. cutting millions of dollars sometimes from companies. Sacred cows came up. Next thing you know, when you can start to slaughter those sacred cows and you start getting into cost cutting, the next thing you know, there's a lot of money that could be saved for a company. And I want you to talk about that a little bit.
Well, in the particular case that Patrick's talking about, there was a company that had gone through a lot of cost cutting, and they said they were at the bone. And in a matter of sitting down and having a meeting like this, we were able to cut $13 million in annual expenses. $13 million. So the business went from contemplating bankruptcy to actually being wildly profitable. So that's why you want to get your executives on the team in the right frame of mind and set up the meeting correctly. Another category of assets, and we're using that word freely here, is something I call initiatives. What are some initiatives that the company's up to? Sometimes those initiatives are spreading everyone too thin. Sometimes there's a golden goose that's laying golden eggs as an initiative, but you got all these other initiatives that are driving everyone thin. So you want to have a category called initiatives. Play with this. Be aggressive. Be creative. Get those tabs out. And here's the bottom line. You want to do this until about noon. You want the quarterback working with the leader. Hopefully they're the same, quarterback and leader. When I say quarterback, that's the person who's typing. So you want the person who's typing to create tabs. And if you're separate from the person who's typing, you as the leader want to say, add a tab for initiatives, add a tab for cost-cutting ideas, add a tab for stop doing list.
And that's a good segue, I was going to say, because that's what happens. Say, okay, what's the list of initiatives we're doing right now? What is their viability? And again, the three words will come up when you're looking at initiatives. What's the simplicity? Are they simple? Probability, what's the likelihood they will succeed? And do they carry with them leverage? So those three words, which you're going to hear over and over again forever as you're a part of this learning community: simplicity, probability, and leverage. And as soon as you look at the initiatives, then Rick, comes up and says, "Excuse me while I whip this out," and that's basically the stop doing list, which is another tab saying, "What are we going to stop doing?" Suddenly, all these initiatives that are hanging out over here that we thought were so great because companies either get ambitious or companies, when they get stuck, are kind of grasping at things to try to make something happen. And all of a sudden, you look at simplicity, probability, leverage. Look at the list of initiatives that are on the table right now, and then all of a sudden you come up with a stop doing list. And then it's like, oh, I guess we'll stop that initiative, stop that one. And now you're whittled down to the ones that are really going to apply simplicity, probability, and leverage and help the company. And it gets people excited about the fact that they can put more energy and focus into things that are going to have the most leverage.
So now what you want to do when you have all of these tabs starting to gel, it's not going to make a lot of sense. In fact, for the ones that Patrick participated in, what you realize is people are unsure. Yes, they're being open. Yes, they know it's going to go somewhere. But around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they've been cleaning out, so to speak. Everything's been put on a document. And then all of a sudden, it's not clear what's the next step. Ultimately, where we're going with this is you want to end up with a crystal clear to-do list with one person's name next to each one. And you want that to be initiatives inside the company, which ultimately become your quarterly objectives. So that's where this is all headed. It's worth adding now, and again, all of this is in the implementation guide, but it's worth adding now that before you break for lunch at noon, you want to have about a 30-minute session. You could do it in 30 minutes because now everybody's free and open and they're saying ideas. They realize that honesty prevails. You want to do your SWOT analysis then. So quarterback says, okay, we're going to put up a tab. What are our business's strengths? What are the strengths about the business? And again, no judgment. Just put it out. We're strength because we're number one in our market. Our strength is we've been in business for 30 years. Our strength is that we have no real competitors. Just list them all out. You should have at least 20. Weaknesses. What are the weaknesses of the business? The weaknesses are that we're run by a husband and wife team, and they're not the best team to run this business. That's a weakness. You may not have the best managers, but you got a committed owner. The owner may not have the skills. So that's the time where the sacred cow comes out. You as the owner, if you don't have the right skills to navigate the business, that's a weakness. Then you go to opportunities. You list all the opportunities. What are the opportunities out there? The opportunities are that there was a new government regulation that went on the books 2 years ago, which opened up all these new markets to us. Another opportunity, we came out with a new product, and it seems to have a massive absorption rate. or we hired a new marketing director, and it seems like the marketing is working. So what are all the opportunities? And then lastly, threats. What are the threats to the business? You can go back and look at the battleship principle module, and we'll tell you, it will inform you in that module some of the threats, but list all them out too. So you definitely want to have the SWOT analysis done before you go to lunch, so make sure you're managing the clock. And the most important thing you could do is plan out the whole day and don't miss up on following the plan, because here's why. Patrick, I remember distinctly him thinking, oh, we're not going to get to all of that. It's not so important that you get to everything. What's important is that you keep the energy flowing. And he saw me cut off lists to jump to another list when people are like, wait a minute, I had some more stuff. And you just want to keep the energy flowing. So now you have lunch. There's some questions and topics you could talk about at lunch. You want lunch to be a working lunch, but you don't want to be taking notes. So close the laptop down. You want to get the communication going. You want to capture anything that happened at lunch on one of your lists. So by now you should have at least 15 lists that are tabs on the bottom of your Excel document. They're lists of some type of assets. So the top says X employees, you got all the names there. Mailing lists, whether electronic or snail mail, you got all of those mailing lists listed. Physical inventory, you've got all that listed. Balance sheet items, as an example, you got all that. So you come back from lunch, and here's the objective. After lunch, now that people are freer, they're more open, people that may have been not getting along are now getting along, all you want to do is say, based on this morning, what are the businesses or the initiatives that we should be focused on right now? Are they new projects? Are they shutting things down? What are they? And you just want to focus on that list. In this case, you just want to do a complete data dump, and you want to take at least an hour. Now, I have had times where I've come back from lunch and we wanted to finish some of the other lists up, so that could take about a half hour. But there is a method to the madness. You want people focused on what should we be doing in the future. This is the most important part of the day, because you've kind of flushed everything out of them. It's all on the computer. Everybody's looking at the screen. It's all there. And now, what should we be doing? Very important. And in your case, Pat, I think we came up with about 50 things.
We go with a lot of stuff, and saying that's a new tab now. You're basically going from the other tabs and then pulling over to saying, here's the list of things that we want to work on. And that's where debate opens up many times, where people are going to fight this out, and you want to invite that debate. Let people speak their mind, because you want them enrolled in the end that these initiatives that we're going to pick are the right initiatives. And this is where suddenly this funnel of all the stuff gets captured and starts to pull into the final outcomes as far as what actions are going to be taken on the part of the company.
And to high level what Patrick just said, because that's actually a harder process. Once you have all your 50 potential initiatives, what you're going to do is you're going to take each one, and the quarterback's going to lead this and say, okay, first initiative, from 1 to 10 as a group, how important is it? 1 meaning it's not important, 10 meaning it's very important. Mm-hmm. You're going to learn something called a 2x2 matrix, which is something that's a later module that really helps you in an almost scientific way judge the value of an initiative. But for now, you're going to get everybody's assessment, 1 to 10. And so you go through all 50 potential to-dos as a company. You're going to rank them 1 to 10. Now, all you do with your Excel data sort is take that column where they're ranked and just put it in order. Now, if you have 50, you probably have about 10 things that were ranked from 7 to 10. And you get rid of everything else. You're just going to, if you remember, Patrick, I made those yellow. And those are the only ones that we focused on. And some of the people said, well, wait a minute, what about that other initiative? And we said, hey, listen, that's not that's not ranked 10, 9, or 8, or 7 for that matter. So you're going to rank them how you want. But in Patrick's case, I believe it was ranked 7 to 10. Mm-hmm. Anything ranked 7 to 10 we're going to consider. Everything else we're going to put to the side. Now, this is how the meeting ends. And again, you want to end by 4 o'clock. You want the afternoon to be about the initiatives. You take those ones that are highlighted, that were ranked from 7 to 10, and you decide what are the 5 initiatives that we're going to take on. And by the way, there is a method to this madness. As I've said, the reason you want 5 initiatives is because you're going to probably have about 5 people in the room. And nobody leaves that room without being the head of one thing. And my friend Vern Harnish used to say, if you want something not to get done, make sure there's 2 people in charge of it. So Vern would go into a company and he'd say, I'd be able to figure out what's not happening in the company because there'd be 2 people in charge of a department or 2 people in charge of a project. So the point here is 1 person in charge of each initiative. And that's where you want to end up. So we took a lot of time to lay the groundwork here. We're going to go now to the applications. And basically what we're going to do there is very quickly summarize how it's all going to go down so you're a little bit more clear. And then you could download the implementation guide, set the date, and execute on your war room. All right, so welcome to the application section of the war room. The way Patrick and I designed this module is we want you to only have to revisit this section, which is the application section. So we're going to summarize everything so you don't have to watch the beginning, because the beginning, all the tactics and strategy, hopefully that's been internalized for you. So this part of the video is called the application, as you know, and we're going to be really clear and specific on what you need to do, and hopefully we'll wrap this up quickly so you can get to work on your war room.
One of the things about the war room is that regardless of the scale of business, it's pretty much the same. So whether you're a proprietorship, practice, or you're a Fortune 500 company, pretty much the same rules apply. The content in the war room might be different, but the same rules apply. So we went through in overviewing the whole thing in the previous part of this module, everything about why, what, when, etc. So step 1 right now for you, set a date. When do you want to do this thing? And I would bias towards giving more time rather than less, so that you have time to gear up and plan for it as compared to springing on people in a more reactive way. The urgency of your need of a war room might have something to do with how soon you set that date, but bottom line, step 1, set the date. Step 2, figure out who. Now, obviously, if you're in a smaller business, like if you're in a practice, you're going to be there, and if you have a key person, you might want to take that key person in and say, here's what I've got planned for us. Who else should we invite? And the 2 of you can do it together. It might only be you and 1 or 2 employees. That might be the whole practice, the whole business. So the need there would be then to bring these people together and decide, is there a key vendor relationship we want to bring in, a consultant that we have used, all the things that we enumerated in the prior section of this module that relates to assets that you have in the way of people that you might want to bring in to help out. Rick said that it should be a maximum of 6, including you. On the flip side, it should be no less than 4. So what if you're a small practice, you've got a doctor and 1 or 2 staff people, you're only 3, that's when it's time to start going to consultants, vendors, ambassadors, or affiliates that work with you, key people that are involved in the business. So if you decide that there's only 3 of you there that makes sense, start looking for who that 4th person could be. So the range is minimum 4, maximum of 6. So again, set the date, figure out the who, get out the invitations as we described in the prior module, set the location where you're going to go do this thing, and then you're ready when the event occurs, the room set up, all the stuff's in your implementation guide. Now you're ready to start the actual process.
If you recall back to Module 10, where we included emails and things that you could send out in order to help you hire people, this module is going to be very similar to that, in the sense that once you look at the implementation guide and the supporting documents, you can just start. So we're not going to cover anything that we covered at the beginning of the module, but here's the bottom line. You want to take action. The results of every war room that I've ever done in my life have always been far in excess of what we expected. So there's no reason to wait to do something like this. And so open up your calendar, look for upcoming events out of town or off-sites that you've planned, and set the date. Then invite the people. you could actually set the date and invite people in the next 20 minutes. It really is that fast. And every time that I've done this, whether it's been with Patrick or friends of Patrick's, it's always been that fast. They've delayed, they've been procrastinators, and then they said, look, open up your calendar, let's pick a date. Next thing you know, the date is set, the location is set.
So now just to kind of give a few more examples about these lists and what you might put on them and how you'd work them, let's talk about, for example, initiatives. Capturing current initiatives that a company is involved in, that your business is involved in. And then from that, going to the stop doing list. So what might be some examples of initiatives that they should be looking at that should go on that list?
Okay, well, some lists of initiatives could be initiatives that you're currently undertaking or initiatives that you should undertake. And one example could be a new client drive. So you've decided as an initiative that this year you want to add 500 new clients that are of this size or greater. And remember from the past, when it comes to setting rules, I love this quote, true creativity can only flourish when the rules are clearly defined. So when it comes to initiatives, make sure that the rules are clear in terms of their, the frame is set up correctly. So that's an example of an initiative. In addition to initiatives, you can say, what new products do you have that you've been thinking about? Because remember, you want to have everything out of your brains and into this document. So you might have come up with 15 different products over the years that are rattling about around people's brains. Now you have an inventory list to keep it there. So new products, old products, maybe like Pat was talking about at the beginning of the module, you want to re-presence some of those older things that you've done that may be more viable for the marketplace now. So what Patrick is bringing up now is, what are some things you could think about? So we thought about lists of initiatives, lists of new products, lists of old products. This is your meeting, this is your company. Make sure at the beginning of the meeting that you brainstorm for all the possible categories you can think of. We don't want to lengthen this video any more than it is. The fact is, you've got all the examples from the beginning. You've got 3 more examples now. You want to give them a few more so they have
it? Sure. One thing I would bias, if you remember from the 12 foundational principles, new profit paradigm, be looking for things with recurring revenue.
And that's a great thing, Patrick. A list of all potential recurring revenue ideas is a list. So we're trying here to say, rather than giving you a fish, we're teaching you how to fish, because you may have far more categories than we could think of here.
Now let's jump toward the end of the meeting and something that Rick had framed for us, what we should pick and what we should be saying no to. All the stuff's come out. You've done all the process we've been talking about. Now you're down to saying, hey, we're going to pick the initiatives. We're going to highlight them. We're going to put people's names next to the ones that we pick, who's responsible, etc. But one thing that made it really crystal clear for us and made the decisions like very apparent was putting a number on what the outcome was we're looking for. For example, if we were going to say, and it was probably something similar to what we said for my business, we want to generate $500,000 of additional revenue, that's high margin revenue, in the next 90 days over and above what we would normally do in that period of time. That framed it up. That drove the decisions. Because if you leave it vague and say, we just want to do as much more as we can over whatever period of time, between now and the end of the year or forever, we just want to start producing more, you can't make decisions from that. And Rick was really clear on this, and it helped us all say, oh, now that we have parameters in place, and we're saying it's $500,000 of high margin cash in 90 days over and above what our normal business would do, all of a sudden now we're like, will that help us do that? No. Will that help? And how many initiatives are we going to pick? So basically we said, well, that one will do $250,000, that one will do $150,000, and that one will do another $75,000. Now you piece them together, and the group really gelled on it so that we left with targets as far as cash generation. Not only was that, I believe, the transformational thing, the filter, the transformational filter that got this all going, but every decision moving forward in my business was a matter of saying, okay, here's a new initiative. How do we frame that up? What's the expectation, et cetera, et cetera? And you start managing by that, and it changes how you approach every decision, every initiative, what the company does, what the company doesn't do, etc. So I think they've got a lot of examples here. This is a thick module with a lot of content, and you're going to have an implementation guide that's going to really help give you structure and process to be able to implement this. You got the 12 principles in place. Now you add war rooms to that, and now you have your business acceleration that takes off, and I'm really excited about that for you. And I have to tell you that for Rick, I admire the fact that when I watched this in action for the first time, I was blown away after being in business for over 2 decades. So any last thoughts to bring them home?
Make sure you walk out of there with a crystal clear plan. And I'm reiterating this because I have witnessed war rooms where they weren't clear on what the outcomes were. And it was because I was an observer and the quarterback wasn't clear. This is what you're leaving with. You want to have a game plan as if the game starts right then.
The last final parting word will be this, and it's very critical. Another thing that Rick did once we left with that game plan, and now go back to your principle of rhythms and rituals to amplify your success, weekly meetings with the team that was in the war room, with the spreadsheet in front of them, and now you have a roadmap from a war room that you're going to drive through those principles and create enormous success, and you're going to see a big change in your business. Thank you for watching this module of Business Finishing School. Let your business brain finish what your entrepreneurial heart started.